History Channel.
Today's History Channel classroom may be taped solely for instructional use and may be retained until September 30th, 2004. Thereafter, you must erase or destroy the recording. No other use is authorized by the History Channel.
Niagara Falls, one of nature's great wonders. Spectacular, awesome, mysterious. See it now as the first explorers saw it. Meet the mystics and mavericks who people its history. Share the grand deeds and strange visions that helped shape the new world. Surrender to the beauty, charm, the captivating carnival of Niagara, a history of the falls. Only the neon is new. Niagara's circus world. The strip of cheap thrills and razzle-dazzle on the Canadian side is tawdry, but true to history. Here the heroes are old carnival kings like Blondin, whose many death-defying tightrope stunts unfailingly rope in the crowds. Blondin is the circus name of Frenchman Jean-François Gravelet. In 1859, when he announces he'll string a rope over the gorge and walk across it, it seems a hoax. Even so, property owners, charging admission, cooperate, and the rope goes across a mile from the falls, between the Clifton House Hotel on the Canadian side and White's Pleasure Grounds on the American side. It's a sellout. The prospect of Blondin's fall, a spectacle greater than the falls. The Toronto Globe.
Although the sun was shining in his eyes, he tripped forward, and almost before the people were aware, he had cleared the American land, and nothing intervened between him and destruction but a 2-inch rope. Blondin marched on at a lively pace, his toes hardly appearing to touch the wire.
A web of 44 guy ropes support Blondin's 2,000-foot tightrope, 160 feet above the boiling chasm. The Globe.
After walking out about 150 feet, he suddenly sank down on the rope. An involuntary shudder passed through the crowd as he fearlessly threw himself face down on the cable. Several ladies gave a petite scream.
Well, when he did it, it was high carnival, you know. Tens of thousands came to see this man kill himself. Most people were convinced that he was going to fall off the bloody tightrope, and that'll be it. Crunch.
A reporter in the crowd records that when one onlooker asks another for the loan of his opera glasses, he is told, "I've come from Detroit to see the man fall into the river. Do you think I will lose the chance of seeing it now by lending you my glasses, even for an instant?" But Blondin never even stumbles. He cavorts, somersaults, handstands. Each series of stunts mesmerizes the crowd.
He walked across without any trouble. He tripped across, he ran across, he went across dressed as a Siberian slave in chains, he went across dressed in a gorilla suit. There was nothing, apparently, he could not do.
An orphan at age 9, he becomes a child prodigy on the high wire, and now becomes the darling of America. Says the New York Times, Blondin's act is the greatest feat of the 19th century. But now comes a challenger. When Blondin returns the next year, his first performance attracts a young Canadian, William Hunt, who even sports Blondin's familiar goatee.
He was at the falls watching Blondin perform, and he was listening to the audience oohing and awing and exclaiming how this man was just so extraordinary and nobody in the world could do this, and shouted out loud, "I can do that." And the reaction in the crowd of the people around him was disdain on their part. And so he decided at that moment that he would give up everything and go to the falls and take on Blondin.
Raised on a local farm, the boy is a puzzle even to his parents. They want him to be a doctor, but he's smitten by the Carnival of Niagara, especially the wire walkers. He begins practicing the tightrope. After 2 years and many a tumble, he's ready, but nervous about disgracing the family's name.
One of the problems that William Hunt had when he first walked the wire in Port Hope was that he didn't want his parents to know that he was walking the wire. He didn't want other people in the area to know because it was considered to be such a disreputable thing. But he wanted to present himself in a very different way. So he looked in the newspaper and he found a story about someone by the name of Signor Farini, who was a dashing figure in the Italian wars at that time, who was involved with Garibaldi.
So he changes his name. William Hunt becomes Signor Farini, and he audaciously announces he'll match Blondin feet for feet.
And that was really an effective piece of entrepreneurial showmanship, because the idea of a contest between the two was what caught the public's imagination. Of course, Blondin ignored Hunt, as he should. He was the king.
So at 4 o'clock on August 15th, the band had been playing. The band stopped playing, and silence descended over the falls. All you could hear was the sound of the falls in the background. And that's always the way that it is at a high wire walk. People become extremely nervous because they actually feel that it's almost themselves who's stepping out on the wire. And they had reason to be fearful when Farini was doing this, because he actually hadn't been able to practice. How do you practice walking on a high wire over Niagara Falls?
Says Farini, "I court peril because I love it."
He only got about 15 or 20 feet out when his balance pole became entangled in his guy lines. So there he was, his first performance at the falls, everybody very anxious, and the balance pole is stuck in the guy lines. So he had to stop, try to gather himself, and very slowly stiffen the lower part of his body, move the balance pole over one guy line and then over the other, and then slowly he was able to make his way along the cable. And this started to relax people a little bit, and when he got about 100 feet out, he lay down on the cable and then got up again and went a little bit further. And then he started doing various other tricks.
Farini is slower, less graceful than Blondin, and seems more at risk. But for this, the crowd loves him. He collects $15,000 for an hour's work, he jokes.
Farini embarked on the role that he was going to play that summer, and it was the role of the iconoclast again. He was going to make fun of the things that Blondin did.
It gets crazier. When Blondin announces he'll cook an omelet on the high wire, Farini tops it by appearing as a comic washerwoman carrying and using a washing machine.
But they proceeded throughout the summer to have these various walks, and you could go to the falls in 1860, and you could catch Farini, and then you could go downstream and you could catch Blondin, and occasionally they would walk at the same time.
Over the summer, Farini draws the larger crowds and draws the wrath of his father, who calls the high wire hero a common circus performer.
And then it all reached a culmination in mid-September when, for the first time in history, the heir to the British throne, in fact anybody from British royalty, came to Canada and the United States. It was the Prince of Wales, who was at the time 19 years old, very dashing young individual, very interested in the ladies, very intrigued by things that would go on at a place like Niagara Falls and things like high wire walkers. And the person he had been hearing the most about was Blondin.
Ensuring headlines, Blondin makes an outrageous proposal. He offers to carry on his back the Prince of Wales. And when the prince unhesitatingly declines, Blondin instead carries his manager. Says the prince at the end, "Thank God that's over." So who won?
The winner was, in the long term, was Blondin, because he's the one we talk about. There's no substitute for being first. He did it when nobody knew anybody could do it.
Blondin later travels Europe. Bestowed with honors, he lives to age 73, walking a tightrope to the end. Farini, too, wins wide fame as an explorer and writer, and lives till age 91. After Farini and Blondin, many others follow in their daredevil footsteps, none as famous. But all the emphasis on human spectacle, man above nature, comes to trivialize and impoverish Niagara. Increasingly, showbiz brings just the day trippers. Hotels begin emptying. The hustling becomes more hectic. The framework of the falls, one of squalor. On the Canadian side, little but cheap carnival. On the American side, a shanty town of factories. A paper mill on Bath Island right next to Goat Island. More mills and tanneries all along the gorge. For almost 2 decades, the falls are a receding vision, lost to the torrent of exploiters. Then, in 1869, one man determines enough. It's the fate of Goat Island, rumored for development, that brings Frederick Law Olmsted, America's foremost environmentalist of the time. Co-architect of New York Central Park, then commissioner of Yosemite, Olmsted is to devote 15 years to a new cause, to make the immediate area of the falls public parkland. A stern moralist, Olmsted blames the frenzy of the falls for arousing people's passions.
For Olmsted, the waterfall itself simply aroused the passions beyond control. And it was a dangerous influence and something he wanted to really sublimate at Niagara.
More serene surroundings might cure such bad behavior. Olmsted fights his Niagara crusade on both sides of the border. Lord Dufferin, Governor General of Canada, becomes an early supporter, enlisted by the now celebrated artist Frederick Church. But finally, it's the tycoons like Canada's Casimir Zowski who surprise everyone. His task force recommends government ownership as the only worthy policy.
So that in that sense, Niagara Falls was protected by people who were really far-seeing, and in a time when the idea of setting aside public land for non-commercial purposes was absolutely unknown.
July 15th, 1885, the New York State Reservation of Niagara opens alongside the gorge, and record crowds enjoy every vantage point free. Many, even many who've lived nearby all their lives, are seeing the falls for the first time. Almost 3 years later, Canada's riverside Queen Victoria Park opens, and the local press proclaims that the age of exploitation is over. Prematurely, as it turns out. At Niagara Falls, the equivalent of 1 million bathtubs of water empty every second. To the power-hungry 19th century, a chronic waste. Here, enough power for every need, evaporating. One industrialist voices the frustration.
Here is a power almost illimitable, constantly wasted, yet never diminished, never exhausted.
But government protection of Niagara's riverlands actually hastens power development.
Within a year after the creation of the reservation, the state was granting water diversion rights to Power Ventures so that they could now harness the entire drop of the waters. And in the mid-1890s, power plants were formed, contracts were signed, and Niagara became the electrical mecca of the world.
It's the technology, not the vision, that has been lacking. As early as 1825, Augustus Porter issues an invitation to Eastern capitalists to join in harnessing the river's power. But he's too far ahead of his time. 20 years later, Porter begins an ambitious hydraulic canal to start 3/4 of a mile above the falls. The idea? To divert water in a number of miniature falls over parts of the gorge and use the drop to power mill wheels. Others take over and go bankrupt. At the subsequent auction, Buffalo mill owner Jacob Scholkopf buys the incomplete canal, telling his wife,
Mama, I bought the ditch.
Och, Jakob, what will you do with all this water?
but he knows. He completes the canal, creating a thriving industrial center. Now, in 1886, engineer Thomas Evershed proposes a project that seems as colossal as the river. Instead of a surface canal, he designs a 2-mile water tunnel to run beneath the village of Niagara to a discharge point below the falls, with enough power for 200 factories. And Evershed makes what seems an outrageous claim.
It would be entirely practicable now to light the city of Buffalo 20 miles away with power furnished by Niagara Falls.
Edward Dean Adams, a leading New York financier, is intrigued. Could electric power be widely distributed? He cables the great inventor Thomas Edison, who's visiting Europe. Edison excitedly replies,
No difficulty transferring unlimited power. Will assist. Sailing today, T. Edison.
Edward Dean Adams and his group, they went ahead with their plans for harnessing the power of Niagara Falls without knowing how they're going to do it.
Edison's direct current incandescent lighting by now brightens some communities. But it's still a bulky, costly system. No means exists for transporting power cheaply and safely over long distances. Yet in 1890, construction of the main tunnel goes ahead. 1,300 workers blasting through solid limestone, driven by a still shapeless dream.
The first thing they did was build the last thing you usually build, which is the discharge tunnel, which would take away the wastewater. And they ran this damn tunnel for 8 miles, by several hundred feet deep, under the present town of Niagara Falls, New York.
Seeking a method, the financiers appoint a think tank of eminent physicists to decide which companies can best develop a system for distributing Niagara's power. But already, one man, Nikola Tesla, is certain he has the answer. An immigrant from Croatia, son of a priest, Tesla, at 32, is perhaps the most extraordinary scientist of his time. Tesla knows the falls only from engravings he has seen, but just this inspires him.
Under the system of direct current, which was Edison's system, you couldn't move it more than 20 miles. They wanted to be able to move it farther. Tesla is walking through a park in Budapest reciting Goethe when suddenly, like a literal light bulb goes above his head. He has figured out the principle of alternating current in his head, because he never drew a plan, never made a blueprint, never made a model. He remembered everything because he had absolutely photographic memory.
It is absolutely immaterial to me whether I run my turbine in my mind or test it in my shop. I even note when it is out of balance.
Earlier, in 1888, Tesla patents what he calls alternating current, transmitting power through thin copper wires, potentially over any distance. Rejected by Edison, Tesla finds a backer in George Westinghouse, Edison's rival. At this time, Tesla is struggling to make a living, digging sewers for $2 a day. Now, Westinghouse pays Tesla a princely $60,000 for his electrical patents. So begins a fierce Edison-Westinghouse rivalry known as the Battle of the Currents.
The thing about electricity at this time is it's a great mystery. Nobody understands it. The general public is both mystified by it and frightened by it. And you have someone like Edison who's actually sending out people to warn them about the dangers of alternating current.
Edison's scare tactics are extreme. He publicly electrocutes cats and dogs by misusing alternating current. 1893. At the Chicago World's Fair, in a battle of showmanship, Tesla debunks Edison. He passes electricity through his own body, and he thrills the public with his prophecy of brilliant times ahead.
Niagara Falls has enough power to light every lamp, drive every railroad, heat every store, and produce every article manufactured by machine in the United States.
Convincingly, at the Chicago Exposition, Tesla and Westinghouse set up a miniature powerhouse, complete with working turbines. It clinches the Niagara contract for Westinghouse. Only a year later, Tesla's so-called dynamos, 3 huge turbines, are in place. Edison's company becomes General Electric, which shares in the new power business, using Tesla's system. And now, on both sides of the river, the powerhouses become Niagara's newest wonder.
The power plant itself becomes a great public building, and it becomes a symbol of this modern electrical age. So they use native stone, they build great arched windows. Power plants look like palaces.
With their marble entrances and all the new magical technology, the powerhouses become tourist attractions in themselves. As electricity lights up the new century, the fascination over its origins, its promise, fires an age of invention. The dynamo becomes a synonym for strength. Everything here, the mighty machinery, the sleek control room, is a promise of the superpower to come and the harmony between man and nature. But would it last? Starting out, 20th century America looks brighter because of the promise of Niagara. The first Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, 1901, showcases the optimism. Think big, build big. At the exposition, the centerpiece is a 74-foot sculpture of Niagara Falls, the literal fount of the nation's new energy. Power transmitted from the falls is now a reality, with marvels like the electric tower, which at night becomes a constellation of 200,000 lights. It is dazzling. A seeming reprieve from the grim face of urban industry. Briefly, utopia arrives in a number of fantasy visions. The Human Drift is the manifesto of a traveling salesman called King Camp Gillette, written before he invents his safety razor in 1895. In his vision, a sea of competition is swamping progress. His solution? A city-nation he calls Metropolis, to be run by a single corporation, situated at and sustained by Niagara Falls.
He was going to build the only city in North America. The population of North America was 60 million, and that was going to be the population of Gillette's city.
Everyone is going to come in from the countryside to live here. All your institutions of government and education and industrial output are going to be centered here. And irony of irony, the rest of the country becomes farmland and vacation sites.
On a platform covering the falls, so you'd never see the falls. He was only interested in the power. He wasn't interested in the look of the falls.
In Gillette's metropolis, housed in 24,000 apartment blocks, everyone would have equal possessions, and everything, food, clothing, would be free. America just laughs. But another new century utopian, Henry Perky, succeeds on a smaller scale.
Henry Perky was this rather eccentric figure who led a very sickly life until he discovered the benefits of natural whole wheat. And he credited the whole wheat diet with restoring him to health, reinvigorating him. And he wound up inventing the shredded wheat biscuit, which became a very popular cereal.
In 1901, Perky moves his Denver bakery to Niagara Falls, marketing a picture of the falls on every box of shredded wheat. America laps it up.
Perky was smart enough to know that if he couldn't take shredded wheat to the people, he would bring the people to shredded wheat. And where did the people go? They went to Niagara Falls. So there he built what was quite clearly the most modern factory in the United States or Canada.
Bordering the cleansing river, the health-troubled Perky builds a factory that's revolutionary, as bright as a conservatory.
I figured 30,000 panes of glass. First factory in the country that had washrooms for everybody. First factory that had cheap meals for everybody.
To the evangelizing Perky, bad nutrition explains all society's ills. So he teaches his employees good hygiene, provides fitness facilities and lunchtime health lectures, even after-hours dance lessons. Worker-friendly innovations like coffee breaks and daily fresh uniforms spread the fame of Perky's Temple to Nutrition, making it a top tourist attraction.
And 100,000 people came to visit this factory. You could take a tour and eat shredded wheat, listen to a lecture. This was a factory that was designed to show the industrial harmony that nature and electricity could bring.
It's a shared vision of Eden at the turn of the century. At Niagara, on the U.S. side, along the Upper Rapids, the power companies give free land to attract new industries. It spurs invention. Cheap, mass-produced aluminum is made possible by Niagara's power. So too, silicon carbide, a revolutionary cutting agent. By 1909, a dozen major industries, foremost electrochemical plants, relocate at Niagara. There are few controls, nor cares. Adjoining the new industry, new worker subdivisions are the first in America to know the luxury of light and heat. It seems heaven, but there's a hidden hell. The soured utopian dream of William T. Love, a local real estate developer. In the 1890s, he starts to build what he calls Model City. It's to house 500,000 workers in a Garden of Eden setting, mixing industry and housing along a 7-mile power-providing canal. But running out of money, he builds only a mile of the canal. Later, as heavy industry arrives, the name Love Canal remains, never to be forgotten.
We have many old photos of what was then called the Love Canal, named after William T. Love, of children and families picnicking on the side of the canal and throwing fishing poles in, and it was just, you know, a wonderful place to be.
Love promises the most perfect city on earth. And to Lois Gibbs and her husband, a chemical plant worker, the communities built near Love's abandoned canal do seem perfect.
In 1974, my husband and I, only married 2 years with my 1-year-old son, Michael, moved into the LaSalle section of the city of Niagara Falls. This area was not called Love Canal then. We bought a single-family home. It had a white picket fence. We had a station wagon. We had HBO. We had the American dream. We knew at the ripe old age of 20-some that we had achieved it.
But as the years go by, Lois Gibbs watches helplessly as first her son, then her daughter develop severe health problems, unexplained, until she learns from a newspaper article of the nearby danger of a chemical dump at Love Canal.
It listed the chemicals and it talked about the diseases that were related to exposure, mostly from workers in the plants. And I checked off every single one of Michael's diseases and Melissa's. And I said, this is the answer.
It's not official, and we're just gonna have to sit tight. Right now.
The self-styled blue-collar housewife rallies the community. In 1978, her activism, along with others, leads the federal government to declare Love Canal a disaster area. It's another 2 years and 85 years after the demise of Love's model city before the full, terrifying reality is known. The official report shocks the world. 20,000 tons of chemical waste dumped near homes and schools. 1/3 of the families tested have chromosomal damage, increasing their risk of stillbirths, birth defects, cancer, and future genetic damage. What begins as utopia ends as a nightmare. Revisiting her lost Eden a generation later, Lois Gibbs can take comfort in her place in Niagara's dynamic history, a history of epic successes and failures that is literally to shake up Niagara through the 20th century. Harmony, passion, endurance. The symbolism of the falls makes for the picture-perfect marriage. In marketing Cupid's Call, Niagara once more reinvents itself. The Rainbow City, quick to promote an early 20th century phenomenon, the honeymoon. Ordinary couples could now emulate the fashionable wedding trip of the moneyed classes.
You have reservations for Mr. and Mrs. Leonardo?
319 for Mr. and Mrs. Earl.
Sir, this way, then.
I'm sure you're going to like the view there, Mr. Earl. It overlooks the falls.
Thanks, but I don't swim.
Suddenly, the Niagara honeymoon becomes so popular it's called honeylunacy. But by mid-century, Niagara helps institutionalize the honeymoon.
A Niagara honeymoon, like a Niagara vacation in general, but especially the honeymoon, I think, became like the automobile, like the TV set, a really desired and affordable, accessible commodity after the war.
With its romantic setting and easy accessibility, just a day's drive for half the population of North America, Niagara at mid-century can claim to be, and indeed is, the honeymoon capital of the world.
This is to certify Mr. and Mrs. Adam Pachana visited Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada on their honeymoon. Congratulations to you both.
Helped by the romance of Niagara, the honeymoon takes on a new, sexier image.
The honeymoon was never addressed in popular culture, in newspapers and magazines and films, without a kind of a knowing glance or a giggle or a wink or a sort of elbow. The honeymoon really was about sexual innuendo.
In 1954, Marilyn Monroe arrives to star in the movie Niagara, playing a newlywed with a roving eye.
Get out the fire hose.
In Niagara, both on screen and off, she conducts 2 love affairs.
Would you mind playing this?
Yeah, sure thing, lady. Kiss.
Kiss me.
To capture the raw power of Maryland and Niagara, the film's director devises a scene at Table Rock. And with this, she walks into superstardom. Well, not walks. She wiggles her way. For a full minute, the camera holds on her. 116 slinky steps. Ever since, Maryland imitators have been torching the landscape at Table Rock, never quite emulating the Monroe magic. In the year after Maryland's movie is released, 13 million tourists visit Niagara Falls, more than ever before. Why Niagara? Partly it's nature's majesty, partly the capricious history of this place where there seems never a dull moment. Humans have harnessed the falls, or so they imagine, but every so often the river reasserts itself and the unimaginable occurs. 20th century calamities begin with a series of ice jams, the worst in January 1938, when ice forms around the bridge nearest to the falls, known as the Honeymoon Bridge. The Great Metal Arch is the highest in the world, rising 150 feet above the river. But now, the ice builds halfway up the arch, slowly crushing the massive structure. So slowly that 300,000 spectators, drawn by the headlines, witness the monstrous collapse. June 8, 1956, again, unpredictable disaster. Suddenly, at 5 p.m., the top of the American cliffside above the Scholkopf power plant begins to shake. Rocks like a meteor shower fill the air. Then a 400-foot segment of the cliff top detaches, reducing the power plant to rubble, its debris vanishing in the river. November 9th, 1965, the impossible happens. A fail-safe device on the Canadian side fails, triggering North America's widest ever blackout, just as dusk descends. Within minutes, 30 million people in Ontario and the U.S. Northeast are plunged into darkness for up to 14 hours. But on the bright side, the following year brings a baby boom. Strangest of all, a rock slide that extends over 15 years. It starts in 1954, when a huge chunk of Prospect Point tumbles into the gorge, altering the look of the American Falls. In 1969, concern over tourist appeal and safety is so great, the authorities decide on drastic action. They dry up the American Falls.
I was there when they turned off the water to the falls. My brother and I went down there, and we waited and waited, and finally, you know, the falls dried up. And I just thought, I wonder what the old-time Indians would have thought to stand here at this day right there and say, look at what they did, changing nature.
The American Falls stay dry for 5 months, until engineers realize that the rock slide is actually propping up the remaining precipice, helping prevent further collapse. Today, as a protective measure, the flow of the falls is precisely controlled. A unique binational treaty regulates the torrent. Just enough daytime force to please the tourists, just enough nighttime power for extra hydro needs. And the falls are diminished in other ways. Centuries of human intrusion, decades of pollution from the Great Lakes. But if the falls have lost some of their sparkle, they are still a gem to behold.
What you see is what you get, but I think it's a humbling experience. But to stand on the edge of the railing, overlooking the falls as we do, and just watch them fall. and to get on the deck of the Mist and look up at the falls, because that's the other way you look at them. This is nature. You can't control it. It controls you in the end.
Visitors no longer risk life and limb to see the falls, but they still pay to get soaked and thrilled.
It is still a vast scene. The prodigiousness of the amount of water going over the falls is huge, and it is impressive. The best way to try to get at it, though, is to get very close to the water so that you can actually see it and get almost hypnotized by it and very aware of its power up close.
Yeah, there's still part of it where you can go down there, and if you can kind of block out all of the other stuff, you can still look at that water. You can still think what those Indians must have thought about this great, powerful place, or even what Hennepin must have thought when you see this big thundering wall of water.
For almost 4 centuries, all who have come here have struggled for words. And all who commune here are much the same, each seeking to make this place their very own.
In spite of everything, in spite of human tragedy, in spite of the con men, in spite of the carnival, in spite of all the rich and varied and terrifying history of the falls, one word still sums it up, and it's the old one: sublime.
The History Channel Classroom now continues.